So again, our host for this morning's Shifting Perspectives webinar is Dr. Sam Rockwell, the Program Director for the Master of Arts in Strategic Leadership here at Life Pacific University. Dr. Rockwell is also esteemed faculty, a highly successful executive consultant, a published author in matters of strategic leadership and beyond, a pastor, a former district supervisor, a passionate aficionado of jazz. The man has talent, skills, and interests that are too numerous and long to list, but we're so delighted to have him here because as one of his former students, I will say that you never leave a room with Doc Rock without being challenged, convicted, inspired, and changed. And many of you know from having classes with him that change might be one of his favorite words, depending on what you add before change. Whether it's deep change or strategic change or meaningful change, you're going to come out changed. So we're so delighted to have Dr. Rockwell present this morning on Shifting Perspectives. Again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will be happy to direct those to Dr. Rockwell as we go through. I'm here to be your webinar host. My name is Chris White, and I'll be offering some additional info at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'd like to say thank you, Dr. Rockwell, for joining us. We're so appreciative of your expertise and your leadership in this webinar, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Christopher. And that was all very kind. And also to Sarah, appreciate your kindness and love the opportunity to be able to talk to many friends and wonderful people who've joined us. So the question here before us is, how do we cultivate a strategic mindset to navigate a strategic organization? And even as we'll find out as we talk together, to navigate a strategic life. It begins here and proceeds from there, as we will see. Many of us as leaders find ourselves on the proverbial dance floor of the organization. And what that means is that you're taking care of operations, because one thing we know is that in an organization, things have to get done. And it is completely legitimate to be on the dance floor, getting things done, and to be focused on the task before us. The problem with that is that sometimes it's very reactive. We're always engaged with the urgent, not always the important things to the organization ultimately. And we are less strategically proactive than urgently reactive. After all, that's what the organizations typically reward. And that's how we got our jobs in the first place, right? Just getting things done is what is rewarded. But the results are ever diminishing. What got us to where we are often does not get us to where we need to be and does not prepare us for the future, nor do we then prepare the organization for the future. So what we want to do is kind of create a different order and priority within ourself first. Work on self, and this is kind of what we're going to be talking about in the next few minutes. Work on self, work on the organization, and then do the work of the organization. And immediately that might sound like, man, I got to do the work of the organization every single day. I understand that. And I'm not so much talking about the amount of time as I am a new, if you will, strategic prioritization of yourself and of your leadership priority. Work on oneself, work on the organization, and then do the work of the organization. Research from major organizations that study leadership show that leaders and employees both value a strategic perspective in their team members and their leaders. How do we get there, and how do we do that? How do we, as I've introduced in the little promo, how do we get from the dance floor And sometimes it's like a rave dance floor, you're being jostled and bumped around. And how do we get from that place, which the work has to be done on the dance floor? It's not that that's not important, but how do we cultivate a mindset that helps us to see from the balcony level? From the balcony level, we see more of the organization, how the parts relate to the whole and how the whole relates to the parts of the organization. We see what is distinctive about the organization in its organizational ecosystem, if you will, very important for strategy. And we also see further out into the future of the organization from the balcony level. So, how do we cultivate a mindset, a strategic mindset to navigate a strategic path, both for ourselves and our own leadership journey, and also for the organization? So, the next few minutes, what I'm going to be doing, please indulge me, is I'm going to be showing you a number of slides that kind of pan out and give you a big picture of strategic leadership, if you will, what our new role as leader might be and what it might be in the future, and then how we begin. I'll do that in the first few minutes. And then I'll just be throwing you some very practical, I think pretty easily accessible things that you can do. So to start, let me throw up a framework called Strategic Leadership Constellation. Now, this can be a little bit overwhelming. I'm not going to cover all of this. And I want you to notice that uh, it doesn't necessarily have an order. You can put any of these in, and they all relate to one another, which is what the constellation is trying to set in front of you. But this is just a big picture of strategic leadership, because strategic leadership is a proper discipline and a set of ideas. It's not just a nice sounding, set of words. You want to be a leader and you want to be strategic. This is Strategic leadership is a proper discipline and set of ideas, and these are those ideas. And I've organized them this way from the leadership, but they are what they are. And there are five very quickly, no, in no particular order. Notice that the one there on the left top is a conceptual mindset. One usually gets in one's position of leadership by understanding the technical specificities of an organization, but one must see from a broader sense of decision-making perspective. One must make sense of the organization as it exists in its ecosystem. What's kind of ironic is that many leaders don't know what's distinctive about their own organization because they're so close to it. What is different about your organization? You often know what's valuable about it as a participant, but not how it stands out in its broader landscape where it exists. So you have to have a more conceptual mindset. You also have to be focused on the next one there. The blue is the top management team. What is the compilation? And what are the competencies of your team from a strategic point of view? On the left lower one is also another one, which is systems thinking. An organization is a living system, which means you can know the technical parts of your business or your organization. You can know how to handle operations in terms of um, how it flows and how it runs. But you have to understand that it is a living system, which means it involves people, which aren't entirely predictable, if you've ever noticed that. It means that you can't simply replace one person with another because people are not like parts of an organization. It is not primarily the organization, that is, it is not primarily mechanical. It is more akin to chemistry or a biological system than it is a machine. Another aspect of strategic leadership is positioning. That has to do with what I mentioned earlier. Do you know that the very essence, not what's just on the brochure, but what is the very essence of your organizational identity? Do you understand what is valuable? Do you understand what is rare? What is inimitable? Or what that means is it's not easily imitated. Do you know what those things are in your organization so that you know what gives you a competitive advantage if you're in business, or what gives you a distinctive voice in the community of organizations in which you reside? And do you see and understand that larger community of organizations in which you live? You must see that to be on the balcony and to have a perspective and give leadership to what is. Now, on the bottom right, you will see the fifth in the strategic leadership constellation, which is leader, discipline, and focus. Now, what is counterintuitive about this is that when you're thinking about strategy, you're thinking about action out in the real world. After all, strategy is the practicality of reality. And that is absolutely the case. That is true. So it's counterintuitive to sort of go into your own mind and be reflective and to think and to start with oneself because you're being motivated to do things out in the real world, and you will get there, but it starts with you working on you, then working on the organization, then doing the work of the organization. So I want to show you another slide, and please indulge me, if you will, for this one, because this one is called executive competencies.
Sam, before we go forward, can I ask you to
Yeah,
pause there? We had a chat before this meeting. I'm not rudely interrupting the webinar, and Sam asked me to
I did.
interject at points. So I'm just clarifying that for everyone. This was an expected interruption. Before we move forward, you made a comment that I think might be connected to this next slide. You're talking about working in the leader, and you also mentioned seeing people as people rather than cogs or machine parts, that's part of the system's thought. Can you
Mhm.
just clarify for a second, what's the difference between understanding someone's role, maybe their position, an associate, an assistant, and understanding someone as a person within a system? Can you clarify that briefly before we go to the next slide?
Well, it, the big picture here, and the thing that sometimes difficult that is difficult to grasp, is that when working with organizations, we're working with living systems, which means we are working with human beings. And of course, that's obvious, and we know that, but often we don't proceed as leaders as if that is true. And we often are rewarded for our technical expertise, our technique, the structure, the mechanical side, which is a legitimate part of organizations, and not the fact that it is the makeup of the person and the makeup of the team that really makes the organization greater than the sum of its parts. We don't just take out a person and put another person in the same place, like if we were working on an engine and expect it to run the same. So we can't, that's a lot to explain and a lot to think about, right? And your question, Christopher, is really good. But the point is, understanding people and their competencies and their personality and what they bring to the table is both important for that person and the value of that person. But the other thing that we're going to get into here very quickly is that what makes up the team is a different way of looking at the organization that a strategic leader has to have. It's not just the competency of the individual. Does that make sense? But it's the mix of how people work together as a team and how they now can accomplish things that a person cannot accomplish. The whole point of an organization is, what can it do collectively? What is the power of collective action? That's the magic. That is the magic that sometimes we neglect because we're looking at an organization as if it were a machine. So I'm not sure I really answered the question, but you did lure me into some things that are very fascinating.
That was fantastic. I love that feedback on that's the magic is tapping into the collective action that we bring as human beings and not just as cogs in a technical apparatus. That's so fascinating. Thank you, Dr. Rockwell. I will shut off my camera and let you keep going.
Okay, this slide is called executive competencies. Now, when you see that, you might be tempted to go, "Oh, I'm not an executive." Well, first of all, don't let the term executive throw you off. I'm not talking about a style. I'm not talking about a title. I'm not referring to, a starchy business culture, of the CEO or working for a board necessarily. You might well be doing that, but the executive competencies is a set of leadership competencies that an organization must have. The executive, she might wear flip-flops and jeans. She might be very casual. And it might be a small organization and not a large organization. But the point that I want you to see looking at this briefly, we're not going to go into it a whole lot, is that it is a way of leading the entire organization. It is distinguishing the parts from the whole, understanding how the whole relates to the parts. And it's seen into the future in a way that is long term and in a way that is broad. The thing that I want you to notice about this ring of pyramids, and I've constructed this around what is very well known in terms of executive competencies, but I've arranged them putting the strategic and the conceptual blue ring on the bottom as a foundation. The one thing that an executive has to have, like for instance, just to give an example, I pastored a church. I started it, I was in an entrepreneurial function role for many years. That was my main function. Then I became a sort of operational person. This is very, very normal, and many of you might find yourself in this role. In other words, I was getting things done and I was working with my team to get things done. I was in an operational functionary role as the leader. I was always called the pastor. That's not the point. And then I realized, not really understanding what I needed to do or what the organization needed, I needed to become more executive in my approach. My title wasn't going to change, but I was going to have to make sure that the operational work of the organization was done, but that I wasn't buried in it. I wasn't always on the dance floor in the middle of the urgent. I had to be more strategic and giving myself to things that were important, but not immediately and urgently demanding of me. So I want you to just look at this and see that the strategic and the conceptual piece of it is foundational and it's on the bottom. A leader needs to do this. In fact, even your executive function is in your prefrontal cortex, and it takes care of direction and goal setting and higher level functions. And there is some analogous connection there between your executive function as an individual and the executive competency of a leader in an organization. Okay. Okay. So we got that. And it's okay if you don't get all that. Just take a deep breath with me. And now let's go to that ring on the bottom, which is strategic and conceptual point of view, and look at what I call the strategic leader inside out journey. And you'll notice this set of concentric circles. And you'll notice in the middle is what I call the core counterintuitive kind of starting point. And it is counterintuitional because you are beginning this journey doing some things, learning some things that didn't get you where you are, but will get you where you need to be. Notice on this slide, perhaps you've been in operations. You don't call it that maybe, but you have to get things done every single day, and the organization doesn't exist if they don't get done. That's why it's urgent. That's why it's important. And the leader does that work, but you've got to make that switch. You've also been very reactive, which you have to be. What is happening and flying at you all the time has to be managed, but it doesn't always have to be managed by you in the same way that you've always done it. You have started out usually as a kind of individual contributor. You did something well. I promise you, you did something well. And because you did something well, someone asked you to manage other people who did something well too. And that is completely different work. That's what's funny about it. Managing people who do something well because you do something well is not the same job as doing something well. It's managing. And leading those who are managing those who are doing something well is a completely different role than the management work. Individual contributor to manager to leader are all pivots that are counterintuitive because what got you to one place will not get you to the next. It's crazy, but it can be done and you can do it, I promise. The other thing listed here in this core is proximity to strategic distance. It is not that you are not close to the organization, but you are also exercising perspective and distance from the organization in a way that you did not before, involving a broader scope of the organization, an external as well as internal perspective of the organization. You see the parts of the organization as they relate to the whole and vice versa. You also have a set, this is very important and we won't be able to get into it too much. You also have some basic indicators and trends and patterns that you're always watching in the organization and outside of the organization. You're not just seeing the day to day, but you're seeing a broader perspective. The other thing that you're seeing is the future in the way that you haven't before. What are the decisions that need to be engaged in, thought about, reflected that involve the long-term future of the organization? Integrating short-term perspective with the long term. Three things about strategic mindset: broad scope, as I've said, future focus, and change orientation. What and how does the organization need to change for it to realize its best potential? How can we achieve collectively what we seek to achieve together. All right. So I've given you all those slides. And now I want to throw some things at you, if you will, to try to answer the question, how do I take steps forward to cultivate a strategic mindset to navigate a strategic organization? How do we um, master the essential aspects of strategy, creating strategy, implementing the strategic playbook? Well, those are big questions we might not get to yet today. We'll try in future sessions, perhaps. But first, we have to start with oneself as the leader. We don't want to put the cart before the horse, if you will. We want to start with, and Chris, why don't you put that slide up real quickly? Work on self, work on the organization, and then do the work of the organization. Now, this slide doesn't mean you spend 50% of your time at work on yourself. What it means is that it's a relegation of priority. The priority has to change from merely doing the work of the organization, which is technically it's kind of management work, which is important. But your priority is now, how do I work on myself and cultivate more of a strategic mindset? That's what we're talking about today, anyway. And then work on the organization and then do the work of the organization. So I've got some things to throw at you, and that's how you'll feel about it. But I'm just throwing these things at you, things to think about, things to start and do. All right, here we go. Let me give you some things. Take that down, Chris. And I've got some things for you to think about. All right. Number one, question. Asking yourself new questions about yourself and your organization. Question your leadership location. That is, where are you and where is your organization now? What is needed now? That's why reflection is so counterintuitive, because you want to just do stuff. You want to get things done. You want to take something that works for somebody else and implement it. But what is needed for you and your organization, and what is needed for you, is a very important part of the equation as the leader. Where are you and what do you need to do now? What does your organization need from you? Both of those questions are important. What might be required beyond your current leadership confidence zone? This is what I've always done and I've been good at. That's great. But what got you here may be in the way of getting you where you need to be. Does your leader identity, what you tell yourself about what kind of leader you are, need transforming? All of those questions will drive you crazy, but they're a very important starting point. Deep, reflective questions about yourself and your organization. Question. Secondly, tinker. Permit yourself to nurture a curious and broad-minded perspective. Strategists see patterns in different disciplines, subjects, and aspects of life. Often when we get into a leadership position in an organization, our perspective actually becomes very, very narrow, because we have to get certain things done all the time and they keep coming at us, and that's understandable. And we have to be able to make that shift and to see greater, broader patterns, embrace a wider and more varied range of interests. What are things that you were interested in as a kid, maybe, that you've neglected now because you're an important leader in an organization? You don't have time for that. It might actually be very important for you to rediscover those things. Let the specialist pan out and see further and differently. Let the mischievous tinkerer play again. Very important. Next, learn. Learn, 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 learn. Block time for learning and reflecting. Go back to school. Of course, I would say that. But go back to school figuratively and metaphorically. Practicing distance begins with getting out of the urgent and permitting yourself the gift of perspective. That's a very important part of the journey. It requires resistance to the tyranny of the urgent. You've heard that phrase. Here's another phrase: the tyranny of the practical and useful. You think, wait a minute, I'm very practical. You should be. And it's only what's useful that's really important. Not exactly always. Strategists see things conceptually. They make connections between different things going on in their organizational ecosystem. You must allow yourself permission to learn in new ways. Learning proceeds from, in the MSL program, we talk about this in more detail. I won't here, but it proceeds from learning as an object. That's how a child learns, very concrete thing. Proceeds from an object to a tool that is useful to a lens that you see through, so that you have a much, much larger menu of ways to see things. And learning is then learning how to see through different lenses depending on what you're looking at. So learn. The next one is fume. Fume. Embrace the restlessness and discontent inherent in transitioning from operational manager, so to speak. That's one example that I've given, to strategic leader. Think about that for just a moment. In fact, maybe you're even in the webinar today because you're feeling that. It's like, I need something, and I'm not quite sure what it is. There's a dissatisfaction and frustration when you realize, usually unconsciously at first, it's back behind your conscious level of engagement, but you realize that you're in a leadership cul-de-sac. This awareness is a necessary prompt for you to get from the dance floor to the balcony level. And it is a very frustrating sort of place to be. And what I want to say to you is it's okay to feel that before you have all the answers. Fume, let that be, but understand. I had the same kind of experience in a number of different stages in my own life, that what I was doing has been okay, but now I have to have a shift in thinking and in living and in learning to become the leader that the organization needs and that I need to be. And I resist it while at the same time understanding that I need to enter into this journey. Fume. It's legitimate. It's okay to feel that. Take a vacation, maybe get a therapist so you don't drive your spouse crazy, but it's part of the journey. The next is team. Team. Practice leading a team. This is kind of in the weeds a little bit, very practical. Practice leading a team rather than merely the individuals on the team. Often we're leading individuals in a group and we call it a team, which is okay. But a team is a group of people that are sharing responsibility for outcomes together. They're still specialists in their area, but they also, if you will, have a strategic mindset about the entire organization. Strategy involves a paradigm shift of seeing and leading people in their larger cultures. Begin to recognize and address team leadership as its legitimate sphere of influence. And Chris, you just stop me when I'm done. Got a couple more to do. Otherwise, we can do them another time, though. Team. Think of the team in a new way. That's a big thing. The next one I want to put there is bridge. Permit yourself to be in organizational parlance. Those of us who are dorks in this area, there's a word called boundary spanner. And it means belonging to and appreciating the value of various, sometimes polarized communities and organizations that you belong to. And it feels awkward, but it is a very special, strategic sensibility. In other words, you may be like in my life, I was a pastor, I was a consultant, I'm a writer, and I publish. I'm in the church world and the business world, and often I'm seen as an outsider in communities that I legitimately belong to. But I'm also cross pollinating and connecting people that don't normally connect with each other. That is a strategic gift in an organization. And often I talk to people who are like, oh, I don't want to be in this position. I never want to feel like I'm an outsider. I don't want to be with people on one side of the spectrum that don't get along with the other side of the spectrum. This was the kind of person Amy Semple McPherson was, by the way, but more about that at another time. Okay. So the other is, are we done yet?
Sorry, Sam, there was a lag there. You have about 2 minutes left if you'd like to use it.
I do. I do want to use it. A
Okay.
couple more. Come on. First of all, dream. Practice visceral, right in the emotional center of your heart. Practice visceral visualization of how you see your future and your organization. Visualization should be visual, as you might think, and it should be personal, and it should be describable. Strategists have to live there a little longer. Okay, that's one. The next one is partner. Find a safe intellectual equal as a strategic sounding board. You must have a thought partner who validates and support this emerging strategic mindset. Let's talk about that, but we'll move on. Two more quick. The other one is quote unquote visionize, because I'm using it specifically. Visionize, I use this as the way I use it. And what I mean by visionize is I visualize what I see as a leader. Visionizing is helping the team to see the future together. It means that there are shared images. It's not just my vision of the future. It's not just personal and individual, but it is an increasingly shared set of images about what we see in the future. What about our common vision? Again, is visceral, emotional, personal, describable. What's the narrative that it creates? Okay, one more, and then we got to give it back to Chris. The last one is personalize. Simply being more strategic about your own leadership journey. How do you start? How do you prepare? What do you do first that is different from what you're doing? So, those are some things to think about. I know that I've given you a lot of stuff there, but my hope is that we'll have another webinar like this and sort of build um, build some thoughts and some ways of thinking together. Christopher?
Thank you, Dr. Rockwell. That was fantastic, I have to say. Uh, I just have such fond memories of being in class with Doc Rock, and this brought me right back to that experience. Uh, I I just want to say it's such a gift to be able to have these sorts of challenging questions that push us into a deeper reflection about our roles and responsibilities, and just this ability to get out of the chaos of that sort of mosh pit on the floor that you described, but also to consider our own interactions within that very living and organic apparatus that is an organization. Uh, I'm going to talk for just a moment about possible next steps for those of you who have felt especially inspired and challenged by this presentation. My own story is that I became a pastor after nearly a decade of time spent in the US Navy. I had extensive leadership training. I had led into combat deployments, and I came into pastoring thinking that the leadership tools, check, that's taken care of. What became very quickly apparent is the human factor that Dr. Rockwell spoke of was so unique and so specific to that church, that context, that organization, the groups of opportunities, challenges, questions required a completely different leadership apparatus than I had before. And as I looked for help and answers, what I discovered was I could find mentors, but no one could specifically tell me how to be the me that God was calling out in that moment. And so this type of thinking process, this strategic journey, was essential in becoming the leader that I needed to be faithful to my call in that organization. And if you're feeling something similar, whether it's you're feeling a call of leadership on your life, or you find yourself in an organization where you're on that dance floor, you're feeling jostled, you're feeling like the chaos of the organization is taking over. If you have a sense that as you hear this, you have a responsibility to grow and to change and to take on that self-work, a fantastic place to pursue that is in our Master of Arts in Strategic Leadership. Dr. Rockwell is the program director and faculty, and you just got a taste of the real essence of what it is to be in these courses and classes that are so transformational. I think of my time in the MASL fondly. I continue to have deep and lasting relationships with my classmates and faculty. And so I can't recommend it enough. And I think it speaks to how profoundly helpful that program is that we have alumni and current students in this call. And so a couple of next steps that I want to offer for anyone who's interested. The first I would say is that you can find more information in a couple of ways. Hopefully you're able to see the QR code that I just put up on the screen. If you scan that QR code and fill out the form that it takes you to, we'll send you these slides. These slides are gold. Dr. Rockwell is being incredibly generous and letting us use his own specially designed materials and sending them out to anyone who fills out this form. So if you complete that form as a thank you, we'll send you these slides so that you can reference them on your own. So if you just use your smartphone to capture the link on that QR code, it will direct you to the form where you can fill out your information. You can also ask more questions. If this inspired questions for you, that this program brought up questions that you really feel need to be answered in your leadership journey, you can email me at the email address on the screen, cwhite@lifepacific.edu, and I'll compile those questions for Dr. Rockwell, and we'll send those out as a sort of single manuscript that you can benefit from other questions as well as your own. Or if you just want to check out the Master of Arts in Strategic Leadership program, you can go to the link that I've described there on the slide. But if you fill out the QR code, you'll also be sent information with that link as well. So the most expedient way is really to fill out that link. But what I would encourage you is if you have felt in this meeting that sort of that kindling of a fire, that sense of that passion, that conviction, that sense that maybe Dr. Rockwell was speaking right to you, that maybe he was calling out things that you need to pursue, pray carefully about taking the next step, about joining the MASL community. It's transformative. It has lasting benefit. It will inspire you. It will transform you, and it'll transform your organization. I can't speak highly enough of it. And so we're delighted that you're here. We'll continue to communicate as to upcoming opportunities. But I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I want to say thank you, Dr. Rockwell, for an outstanding presentation. I know I took away a lot from it. I'll be thinking about my own percentages. How much time am I spending on myself, and where am I doing? Where am I thinking? Where am I strategizing? I'll be more effective with the way that I use those times and those resources. And I'll be using those different graphics to inspire my own leadership journey. This was incredible. We're incredibly grateful. I'll leave the QR code up for a moment, but that's the end of our presentation. In about 2 minutes after I've given people a chance to take the picture, I'll end the webinar. But thank you again so much. And thank you, Dr. Rockwell. This was a gift, and we really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you both.
Okay, I'll leave this up for just a few more seconds, just in case anyone's having difficulty. And of course, you can always email me if for some reason you had a difficult time scanning that QR code. But I'll just leave it up for a moment. And then once you've got it, you can feel free to log off. And I'll shut it down in just a few seconds.
Thank you, everyone.
Dr. Rockwell, that was just like being in one of your classes. That was fantastic. I felt like I had a little time machine experience where I was furiously taking notes, trying to remember everything.
I hope everybody also catches the transitional awkwardness and frustration and realize that that's really a part of the journey, and that's really important that you feel that. And I hate feeling that, but it takes a little while for the frustration that goes on sort of behind your own brain unconsciously, like, to actually begin to say, oh, now it's making more sense to me. That process, that's growth. And that is leadership. That's the leadership journey that we're all on.
That's so helpful. I
And
remember.
if you're feeling it, it means you are leading, even though you can often feel very inadequate in the journey. It is normal to feel that way.
That's such a fun reminder. That was truly one of those moments where you said pretty much exactly that to me, because I hadn't found yet that my frustration could be a fume when I joined the MASL. And you were so helpful in saying, don't see it just as frustration. You're not being held back. You're being catalyzed. Let that frustration become a fume that brings you forward and helps you to grow. It was incredibly transformative for me. And just to the question that's on the chat now, because this will be in the recording, if you are interested in classes that can be experienced outside of other programs, just email me and I can follow up with information about options for those particular pathways.
Thank you, Christopher, and also and everyone else on the call.
Amazing. And with that, I'm going to end the webinar. Thank you again for everyone who's still in the room. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Dr. Rockwell. Have an amazing day.